We are in the midst of greatness, ladies and gentlemen. My main man is about to make his way over here. This man is a man who needs no introduction at any Super Bowl function anywhere. How are you?
I'm fine, Nestor, and just come back to reality.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Steadman. John F. Steadman here with us.
Oh, no.
Hey, man, how are you?
I'm doing just fine, and I sure thank you for having me. I'm not even warmed up yet.
Oh,
I just got off the plane.
You got to get warm when you get in here with me, John. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
I'm sorry I missed you last Thursday night out at the 6th anniversary. It was
touch base, though, by way of telephone.
Well, I really appreciate you checking in with me, but I'm sorry you couldn't be there in person to see the mob scene, and I'm glad you didn't go out and brave the weather. But I'm glad you're here with me now.
You know how I remembered you from way back when.
Way back when, man. Back in the day.
American days.
Absolutely. Okay, so you don't do that media day zoo thing I went and did today.
I've been through it so many times, and it's just total chaos. I don't know
it
how
it really is chaos.
I don't know how it was this year.
I'm a chaotic guy. You know that, so I love that.
Well,
I thrive on that sort of
chaos
thing.
in there, you create it.
Right, exactly. If it's not there, I'm going to make it up. John Steadman here hanging out with us. So what do you think of the game? Give me some thoughts on this this game. You've seen them all.
I've seen them all, but that doesn't give me any barometer for judging this one. And I really haven't had a winner since Garfield was in office.
Well, you keep going after AFC. That's your problem. You're an old AFC guy from the old Colt days, for sure.
Well, not exactly. I never have really been a provincial fella. I mean, just because a team was from Baltimore, as opposed to you, I've tried to preface it on being just a little bit more objective.
Well, you want to be right more than anything else.
You want to be right, but at the same time, I want to be objective, and I try not to get carried away with just because it's a Baltimore team or a Baltimore interest. I'm trying to look at it objectively. Now, maybe sometimes that's a little twisted, and I admit to that. But anyhow, at least I think if you're a newspaper columnist, you got to have an opinion.
Absolutely. The same thing as a sports talk show host.
You're in a bad way if you don't.
Tell me about 31 of these. Now, this is the 32nd. Do any stick out of your mind? Not for the game, because the games, we've all seen the games.
Exactly.
We've all seen the games.
Yeah.
I think the one thing, the listeners back there, that you have been fortunate to see all 32, and I'm envious of you, but I've been to 4 of the last 6, and I probably will be going to these for as long as I'm on the radio. And I hope that I go to the next 32 in a row.
Have the opportunity to.
And I think the one thing that people, and that until I went to my first one, it was courtesy of you. You got me some tickets back in the Minneapolis game several years ago. Yeah, we thought the Oilers were going to go, remember? And then they didn't make it. But nonetheless, I think that people miss the experience of coming out here, that you could come out here and just spend the whole week. And the game's almost an afterthought, really. And the game's a lot of times, as you know, forgettable games, blowouts, games weren't really worth seeing to begin with. But what was your favorite experience, your favorite place, and the pregame events and all that?
Let's go back to number 1 in Los Angeles. Like 2 hours from here, the place didn't sell out.
Right.
Tickets were economically priced, affordable for any football fan.
It wasn't corporate America the way this is.
They had not yet discovered it. But I give the late Commissioner Pete Rozelle all the credit for it. He decided, being a Californian by birth and raised here and nurtured on California sports, that the fairest way to have a football championship game was to try to minimize the weather factor as much as you could and play it in a warm weather site. I think he visualized it as a counterpart to the Rose Bowl, and ultimately it turned out really to be that way, but not from the start. The first 2 years, it looked like it was an overmatch, that the NFL was going to dominate it, and there was some consideration, conversation within the league that maybe the best way to go about it was to give up the idea of playing the NFL against the AFL. That you'd take the team with the 2 best percentages, and even if they came from the National Football League, and play the championship game. But of course, what happened to Baltimore in Super Bowl III changed all that.
And then Miami came into the league and dominated it and sort of justified it rather quickly, that the AFC
I would have to think,
AFC,
though, Nestor, that going back in that 3rd year, if Baltimore would have blown out the Jets, there would have been serious consideration about changing the format, that they would have taken a team with the 2 best percentages and matched them in the same concept. I can remember walking back that morning from church with a great fellow by the name of Jack Venisi, who died in his early 30s. He was he acquired most of the talent that Lombardi put together for the Packers, and Muggs Hallis, who was George Hallis's only son. And walking back to the hotel, all 3 of us wondered, how long the game would last, if it really had a future. I'm not that much of an oracle that I could, or clairvoyant to look into the future, But after the Jets not really mauled them, but after they destroyed that 16.5-point favoritism that the Colts had, then the game took on a lot more credibility and a lot more interest. Now, you ask if there's one incident that comes to mind, and I'm asked that a lot. I think there's only like 8 sports writers that are still living.
And I saw some of these. I think Zimmerman from Sports Illustrated is one of them. Larry Felser from Buffalo. Will McDonough is one of them. Jerry McGee from San Diego.
Right.
Those are the only 4 original AFL guys. You were an NFL guy, being that you came from Baltimore. So
I believe there's only like 8 sports writers that have seen them all. I remember that it seemed like the first one in New Orleans, the papers were on strike, and I really thought about not going. And at the last minute, I didn't want to saddle the paper with the obligation of going, so I paid my own way, own hotel, my own airfare.
The paper in Baltimore was on strike. The News American. Okay, I thought you meant. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the News American was on strike. The Sun paper was on strike. And I went out there, and, I was just like a visiting fireman all week. But a fellow named Roger Williams, who worked for the San Francisco Examiner, was a sports editor. He said, John, what are you doing? You have anything to do? And I said, no. He said, why don't you write us a sidebar for Sunday? He said, keep your hand in. So
sure.
I remember doing that, and I felt like I was more a part of it. But the one incident that really comes back to me was the game that was played in Houston, I think at Rice. Am I right? At Rice Institute.
There was maybe 5, 6 somewhere in there.
It was a coldest darn day.
Was that a Miami game?
Pittsburgh won.
Pittsburgh, okay.
Pittsburgh won. And after the game was over, I walked into the press room with Arthur J. Rooney, who was really, I can't say enough about him. Of all the men I've met in sports, he was something different. He was from very humble background.
Lived in the same house his whole life?
House all his life. Every night his wife and him would go out and bring in poor children from the neighborhood that didn't get a solid meal or a square meal. And they always had 10
Quit telling me all these good things about the Steelers, You're going to make me start to like the Steelers.
I'm just going to tell you about this man, though, because he had a horse farm in Maryland, and he worked both sides of the street. He knew the top society guys in America, and he also knew the hoods and guys with connections. And he worked both sides of the street. He was just a man that everyone trusted, people in high places, Supreme Court judges. Anyhow, when the Steelers finally won, it's almost like it's preordained that you run into certain people. And who do I run into but Art Rooney when the game's over? And he's walking over to get the presentation of the trophy from Roselle. And I said, Arthur, how do you feel? And he said, the big thing today, he said, is we finally won, and maybe people won't think I'm so stupid. He said, because for 40 years, they said I was too stupid to win. And now that we've won, I don't feel any smarter than I've always been. He just was a gem of a man. I think if you talk to anyone who was in the NFL, they'd say that Rooney really was a citizen apart. He had time for everyone. If he met you, he'd see you 3 years from now and say, hi, Nestor, how you doing? And he would drop you a postcard from like St. Anne de Beaupré in Canada. He was a devoutly, very religious man. I was at his funeral when he died, and I was standing outside the church before the funeral started, and there was a congregation on the corner of a bunch of really well-muscled fellas. And I said, gee, who are they? I said, could they be the fire department guys? They all had on red T-shirts, and the usher was standing there. He said, no, you don't know who they are? I said, no. He said, that's the ground crew. He said, and Arthur every year would take, on every road trip, he'd take 2 members of the ground crew. Now, they were fellas that had never been any farther south than Monongahela.
Right.
And he said, another thing that why they loved Arthur so much is every time that they changed and made the transition from baseball to football, it was about a 12-hour day for them to work. So Art would send a caterer out with a hot meal for those guys working at Three Rivers Stadium, changing the field over from football to baseball and baseball. He was that kind of a
You get me all moist and weepy here. Now you're going to start to make. Next thing you're going to start saying good things about the Redskins.
There was never a man like Rooney, and just.
So that was the most special moment for you, seeing the Steelers win.
And he finally won, and the way he handled it, and no one expected him to be any different, and he wasn't. All
right, 821-1360, #sign 1360. It is 6:10. John Steadman's hanging out with us. I guess he's got nothing better to do. We're going to hang out all night. We're going to go out and hit the bars down here at the gas lamp. Right, John?
I'm with you, baby.
Yeah, all right. Going out. That's 2 generations of football fan there, me and you. We're going to take a break here because we got to pay some bills around here. Budweiser Sports Forum broadcasting live from beautiful, sunny San Diego with John Steadman. I'm in good hands here, ladies and gentlemen.